So welcome everyone to the Vertical Church podcast. We're on episode 3. We're going over the sermon Braveheart in the series Check the Source. And my name's Desi Garrison.
I'm Phil Kite.
And right now we're going to go right into the story in 1 Samuel chapter 22. And we find David in a cave, and he's running from King Saul at this point. And he's got 400 discontent men gathered around him. And in that scene, he becomes their leader because they're looking for someone to lead them. So, Phil, having that setting and just thinking back on the sermon, what did you take away from that story?
You know, a couple different things. The first main thing is it's not always going to be easy if you're following Jesus. You know, I mean, David, you pointed out before we were talking before we started rolling with the podcast, you were talking about how, you know, David's already been anointed king. I mean, he knows the things that are coming his way, and he still finds himself hiding in a cave with 400 people who are quite miserable to be around. And unfortunately, this is a pretty clear picture of leadership at times as well, is just because you're a leader doesn't mean everyone else around you is super excited or doing really well. But there's something that's been entrusted to you to get the most out of people. You know, I think David looked around and probably saw things in them that they hadn't seen themselves, you know. And for me, it was a really powerful moment to hear Drew give this message because, you know, part of my testimony is I showed up not really following Jesus, just showed up to a youth group he was leading, and Drew saw things in me before I saw them. And he coached me, he's mentored me, and he's still continuing to do so. So, you know, I mean, when he's giving that story, I'm like, oh dear, when I showed up, I'm like one of the 400, you know. I ain't got any of my stuff together.
Right.
And he still coaxes something out of me. But yeah, I look at that story, and unfortunately, that should be a clear indicator to us that just because we're following the Lord does not mean things are going to go swimmingly at all times in our life.
Right. Yeah. He's running for his life at this point.
Yeah, it's not a great situation.
Right. Yeah, and something that I think about too with this story is like someone is always looking up to you. Mm-hmm. You know, no matter like where you're at. Like if you're a high school student, if you're a college student, if you're a dad, you know, if you're in your mid-20s trying to figure it out, there's always someone like that's one season behind you that's looking at you, and you never know like who might be watching. And so like David finds himself in this season, and all he has to trust in is the Lord. And that's what gives him the influence and like the ability to like lead people. It's not that he was like, okay, I'm in a cave with all these people, I'm going to try to lead them, you know, like the Lord just gave it to him because he was solely focused on loving the Lord. So next in the story, we kind of jump ahead into about midway through David's reign, and he makes a bad decision. And this is the story of David and Bathsheba and Uriah. And so I'm just thinking back on what Drew taught about, what stuck out to you.
So for me in that story was, you know, David was somewhere he knew he shouldn't be. So in that culture, the time when he goes up to the roof and sees her, like, she didn't have to be taking a bath at like a random hour. Like a lot of people were up taking baths and doing that. And David knew, I'm somewhere I shouldn't be right now. And that small bit of compromise got him into a position that really snowballs out of control for him. You know, he has Bathsheba over. That's a bad decision. And then he sleeps with her. She's a married woman, so that's a real bad decision. And then she conceives a child, and so Uriah, you know, he is supposed to be the father since that's his wife. Mm-hmm. So David brings him home and says, hey, why don't you hang out with your wife? And the dude's got integrity out the wazoo and won't sleep with his wife, wants to go back to the battlefront with the troops that he serves with. And so David has the dude killed. I mean, that's another bad decision. I mean, this situation has completely avalanched out of control. Right. And I think about how temptation is always a crack in our heart. Mm. But it's a moment to be filled with Jesus or sin. And unfortunately, you know, for David, the cracks kept coming and he kept going the wrong direction. So what stuck out to me was one bad decision led to another for this guy as he tried to cover up the first mistake. And it all started with him going up to a rooftop when he knew he shouldn't be there.
Totally. It's not like he woke up that morning and was like, well, can't wait to commit adultery and murder someone. You know, like it was a series of events that led to that. Like like you said, like going up to the rooftop, and it's like, oh, okay, it's just these little things that the Satan whispers in our ear, and gets us like one step closer to like his plan of like to kill, steal, and destroy, which is exactly what happened in that story.
Yeah, I'd always be careful when you close the door to your bedroom and go, well, this can't get any worse. And then Satan's going to show him and go, but I've got a better offer, and his better offer is I can make this worse real quick with some more compromise in your character. And so for David, he kept taking the deal, and it kept getting worse. At any moment, he could have stepped up and taken ownership and put an end to the avalanche. But he didn't, and it kept getting worse behind the scenes.
Totally. Yeah, and so even after that, like, he had pretty much been done with the story, and then the Lord brings Nathan in to kind of confront David. And so can you talk a little bit about that and Nathan and David's relationship?
Yeah, so Drew talks about the point in Scripture where Nathan comes up and tells this story to David about how this dude has one sheep, it's his only sheep, and this guy's got a lot of sheep, and then and rather than taking one of his sheep to throw a feast kind of thing, the rich dude takes the poor guy's one sheep away to throw the feast. And David becomes enraged, like, this dude's got to pay it over 4 times, like, how dare he? And Nathan just looks the dude in the eye, doesn't sugarcoat, and goes, you're that guy. And I think this moment for David was so pivotal. Like, we hear now that David was after, a man after God's heart. But I would argue this moment, like, was the moment that was actually solidified. Is he's done all these things, he's done the wrong thing, he hears about this injustice in this parable and says, I'm going to do something, and then he gets called on the carpet of, it's you. You've been the one that's done everything wrong. And I think it's this moment in his character where he can respond to conviction or run from it. And sure, you and I may not have killed someone's wife or, had, a relationship outside of marriage or done all those things or whatever it is. But you and I face conviction every day, and how we respond to it defines our character. I think about, when we heard this lesson, I think about John 3, verse 20, and it says, everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear his deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be plainly seen that what he has done has been done through God. And so I think about so many times when you and I are faced with conviction, like God's calling us on the carpet for whatever we've done that's wrong. We have an opportunity to try to hide in the dark or step into the light. And the enemy always tries to convince us, if you stay in the darkness, like, you won't be found out, you can keep what you have, and things won't go bad. But if you dare to go into the light and respond to what God's calling you to do, it's going to be awful. Your life's going to be over. But the Scripture is actually the opposite. The Scripture says if you step into the light, healing can take place. In this moment where Nathan calls David onto the carpet, David steps up and responds to conviction and goes, you're absolutely right. Like, what I've done is absolutely wrong. And he receives healing. Now, his consequences don't go away. Like, he still has to deal with the consequences of what he's done, but he does have healing. And he ends up being called, now for his whole legacy, was a man after God's heart. And we just talked about, he's done some horrendous things. But it was a powerful moment that he responded to conviction in the right way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just got the image of like cracks in our character. Like, I thought about like a house. Like, if the cracks are all on the inside of the foundation and like we can't see them, then like we don't know to fix them. But, and like, in the dark, in the basement, wherever it may be. But if the cracks are on the outside and like they're in the light, then like we can see them and we know to like work on them and to like bring somebody else in to them, and get some help with that. And so just the power of Nathan meeting David in like that broken spot and like bringing the Lord into it is just like absolutely right where he is healed. And it's just like you said, like a pivotal moment in his trajectory toward like, are you going to continue killing people and committing adultery, or are you going to like choose to like live a life that is solely focused on the Lord?
Yeah, so that reminds me of like when Drew was talking about that in his sermon. He was talking about the bricks and the house we built, and I love that he did that, because at Vertical, we have this core belief that it's not about just any one of us. Like, it's not Vertical Church isn't here for Philip Kike. Vertical Church isn't here for my man Austin Watson. Vertical Church isn't here for Desi Garrison or whoever. But Vertical Church is all of us here for Jesus. And so for me, like I think about one brick, like if you showed up to like an open lot and someone put down one brick and they go, look at this house. It's truly beautiful and special. We'd all go, bro, you're on crack. That's one brick. It's not a house.
Yeah.
But if you get thousands of bricks together, all of a sudden it can become, a beautiful house. And I think that's what we're trying to build here at Vertical is this idea that all of us coming together with our gifts and talents and what God's given us in a unified focus on let's all lay our life down and see what Jesus will do through us. Then we're talking about something special. And it's so much bigger than just any one brick. And so for me, that was so powerful to hear and talk about because I think I feel that so much in my core of what I see is where our church is going is it's just not about any one singular brick, but it's what can all of us do together. Like what can the house look like at Vertical if we each keep being a brick together? But we've got to take care of our stuff, otherwise the cracks can start affecting, those around you.
Right, totally. Because like the storms are coming, like and the trees are falling on the house and there's kids lighting fires in the living room all the time. And so like when this stuff happens, like we need to be able to be prepared for that. And like you said, like hold each other up, hold each other accountable. Like if David hadn't have had Nathan there to hold him accountable, like who would have rescued him,
Right.
So it's so important for us to like stay in community, like even if we are online, like be a part of some community, like get in contact with people and like walk through life with people. Like we were made for relationship, and so in the church, like it's so important. And this makes me think too, in 1 Peter 2 verse 5, it says that we are living stones that are being made into God's spiritual temple. And it's just such a beautiful like arrow right to this point of like what's more important, the house or the brick? Well, we are the living stones that like God is putting us in place in order to build a temple for him. And like as a community, like that's just what we've been called to. The last thing that I wanted to point out was like what steps can we take to look more like David and like the way that he influenced people, and like not only that, but to empower people as well.
Yeah, so the word empower I love. Like it's something I've seen modeled through Drew Grubbs, our interim executive pastor here. It's something that's kind of been instilled in me. And John Maxwell, I think, sums it up really well. He says, being a leader is not how many people serve you, but how many people you serve. Mm-hmm. And it kind of flips this American model of leadership of, hey, just look at me, follow me, I'm an influencer, I got so many people looking at me. But the real leadership is actually almost the opposite of how many people can I try to go and empower to step into what Jesus wants to do through them, And so for me, I think about David and, he had the mighty men and raised up leaders and, he did all these things to empower other people around him. Like, and I look at my own life, will that be said of me? Like, will I look at other people and try to help them step into everything that Jesus has for them? Because if it's not, like, what legacy do I really have? It's nothing that'll impress the Lord at all. And so for me, that's really challenging of like, how many people can I help step into everything that Jesus wants to do through their life?
Totally. Because like, no matter where you're at, like you have someone looking up to you.
Yep.
And like, we all have cracks, but if we have those people around us to like the living stones around us,
yeah,
then that's what makes us be able to empower people and influence others is focusing on being the temple for the Lord, but also like having the bricks around us to like keep us away from, the fires in the living room or the tree falling on the house.
Right on.
Yeah. So this last part we're going to go over is the armory. And so what is the one thing this week that we can kind of carry with us to look more like David in his empowerment and his influence, and also look more like Jesus and the way that we live our life this week?
So the one thing I would encourage people to apply to their life would be that pivotal moment that David had. People remember him as the king. People remember him as the one who won all these battles. I mean, they used to sing songs like Saul's killed his thousands, but David's his tens of thousands. All these accolades that David had. He's killed Goliath. So many people know that story. But I think the thing that defined David the most was how he responded to conviction. Like that moment he had before Nathan, he gets called on the carpet for his sin. He has an opportunity to retreat back into darkness or step into light and receive healing, and take ownership. So I would encourage anyone right now, if you know the Lord's speaking into your life and trying to get you to deal with whatever sin's going on, like I want to implore you, I want to encourage you, I want to spur you on. You absolutely can step into that. Like say, Jesus, I need forgiveness for this. Like this has been going on and I'm so sorry. And it can be a pivotal moment in your life that changes the trajectory of your character for the rest of your life. So like, don't keep trying to run from it. Don't keep trying to hide from it. Like step into that light and that healing that Jesus has for you. And I promise you, it can change the course of your life.
So good. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to shout out to Austin behind the camera, taking care of all the tech stuff. And if you guys missed the sermon last week, then you can check it out on Facebook or the website or our app. And otherwise, we will see you guys next week.